Okay, here we are. I really, really hope Michael is able to join us because I wanted this to be a conversation, not just me rambling around about connections with random things. Because, especially on topics like this, it is easy to seem crazy. So, you want these ideas to bounce off of another human being. Uh, there we are. Hello. Michael.
Weird. That was a weird thing that happened.
So weird. So very weird.
So anyway, all I was trying to say before was that I think Lewis's characters may be unreliable narrators,
Okay.
or
Okay.
it's like the real world. Everybody's got their own mix of knowledge and theories, and they speak what they think they know. But yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's all right. Were you watching at all me talking when you were
Now
trying to
yours,
get?
you said, "Are you there?" And then your thing froze up. So
Oh, for you. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, we just talked about how engineers all have a weird ring. Do you know about the engineer's ring?
No.
You want to become an engineer? My friend was telling me when he became an engineer, they brought him into this room. There was a chain and a and like a old school what is that thing called? An anvil.
Hmm.
And they breaking off links and all this stuff, and there's the oath of the engineers. And this is just like regular. If you know someone who's an engineer, you should just ask him
Huh.
about the ring and if they did a weird ceremony thing. Because
Interesting.
the other element related to this book is the fact that people get into weird ritual societies. And then I showed a little clip of something, Michael, which is two people who are against each other running for president of the United States, George W. Bush and John Kerry,
Oh yeah.
both on the same morning talk show, um,
Talk
uh,
about skull and bones.
talking about Skull and Bones, and the guy's like, "You were both part of the same secret society," and that is actually an element within this where um, the politics is discussed among these university people trying to engineer the world. Um, Mark Studdick has been commissioned to write these random newspaper articles, and he's disappointed. He thought he'd be causing world change, and he's just like, I don't know, getting into these fights and writing for newspapers. Um, and this is a conversation from that hideous strength. Haven't you been told that it's strictly non-political? I've been told so many things that I don't know whether I'm on my head or my heels, said Mark. But I don't see how one's going to start a newspaper stunt without being political. Is it left or right papers that are going to print all this rot about Ascalon? Both, honey, both, said Miss Hardcastle. Don't you understand anything? Isn't it absolutely essential to keep a fierce left and a fierce right, both on their toes and each terrified of the other? That's how we get things done. Any opposition to the NICE is represented as a left racket in the right papers and a right racket in the left papers. If it's properly done, you get each side outbidding the other in support of us to refute the enemy slanders. Of course, we're non political. The real power always is. Um, so that is from the book.
Yeah.
Um, and if you're looking at this kind of stuff, because again, there's secret societies. He was into the occult. He was super high up at Oxford, and was it. It is not, to me. It's not preposterous to think that some of this stuff that Lewis is writing about is not at all um, fantasy. That some of the elements that people think are bananas is just like no, like if you were high up in such a prestigious old university, you would know that such organizations are a reality. Like, full stop, right? Like, the people who are backing up right now or not liking what I'm talking about related to Skull and Bones, I haven't said, oh, and because of this, they're doing this or doing that, or I'm not going in any of those directions. But what I've discussed is just a reality and could be scary because it gives opportunity for secret means, secret reasons behind things.
Yeah.
Do you have a response or thought on that?
Oh no, I mean that was definitely so. Like like I said, the reason why it was such an important book for me, because like during that kind of whole time, there was a lot of like conspiracy talk going around, and there's all this stuff that's like Jeffrey Epstein. It's like, how come nobody really seems to care about what the deal is with that guy as far as like the media, or you hear these stories about like some reporter just gets shut down when they try to look into this stuff too much or whatever, and and everybody would always talk about like 1984 and Brave New World. But to me, the thing that Lewis did in that Hideous Strength is he showed the mechanism through which society could actually transform into either a Brave New World or a 1984.
Well, so this is part of it that I wanted to talk about, is that a lot of the elements that people think are the most bananas are not unrealistic. That there's elements of them that are currently true. So I wanted to talk for a little bit about the objective room. That's why I wanted to talk to you, is because you were talking about the objective room in a video that you did, which I will reference as we continue on. But the first part of, could you explain the objective room for people that have not read the book, what the objective room is?
So the objective room is this room that he's supposed to go and sit in. And everything, and it looks like it's a normal room. Like, it looks like there's nothing special about it. But then all of the like parameters of like the geometry of the room and the like textures and finishes on everything, they're all slightly off or bent or weird. And so it's like everything's like a little bit off center, a little bit tilted. And then like there's like these weird dots and things like on the ceiling that are like, they look like they could be random, but there could be a pattern and you can't really tell. And then there's all these like, the really interesting thing is all the artwork, because the way he describes it is literally like exactly what we say in about like AI art, where you're like, oh, you look at it and you're like, that's a picture of whatever, but then the hands and feet and fingers are all weird and stuff.
They're not right. There's religious imagery, but there's defied religious imagery. And the goal of the objective room is to make a person objective, to stop, like, we're so pulled by our hearts, right? As human beings, the theology underpinning a lot of these ideas are in another Lewis book called The Abolition of Man. Right. Where there's a whole section called Men Without Chests. The idea that we're pulled in these directions because things are aesthetically pleasing. So he's brought to this room that'll break him, and that in his responses to this will show whether or not he's actually fully committed to certain things.
Right. Well, and the first big lie about it is that they call it the objective room. Like, because it's not objective, it's a subversive room. Like, it's hinting at some kind of a normal, like, because the whole idea of like being objective is that you're standing from like a neutral place, and they basically, you could say, start with like a neutral room, an empty room, but what they've changed is every, like, it's one of those things, I guess you could say it's subconscious, that we stand and we would say
we're going to break specifically what we know is aesthetically pleasing. And that part of the purpose is to actually get at whether or not you could be free from those base desires for goodness, truth, and beauty.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way we're going to actually accomplish things.
Yeah.
So this room is kind of meant to break you and to see if you've actually already fully bought in. And with that in mind, Michael, I want to share another video with you, which I'd like to. Here, I'm going to add now. Ooh, I think you may have even been referencing this. So, ready?
He felt rich in a movie sense, which is not something that you find among actually rich people.
Oh, sorry. I meant to start from here.
You met Jeffrey Epstein once.
Yep.
Talk to me about what that's like, coming face to face with somebody of that caliber.
Whatever that means. Well, one thing is that there is a physiological reaction that corresponds to this phrase that, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Like, that's a real physiological feeling. I don't know whether the hair actually does that, but it's exactly what it feels like. You're meeting somebody who is unholy. And, one of the most interesting things is that he was beckoning into a world that didn't seem to exist but for him as the doorman. I think that's one of the things that freaked out a lot of these rich people is that he felt rich in a movie sense, which is not something that you find among actually rich people.
Okay, so
What do you mean?
He gets this sense immediately that there's something deeply, deeply wrong. Is this the right? Do I actually have this lined up right? No, I got to bring this back to 2. Okay, I think this is where he gets into this other bit that I wanted to get into.
So you had a felt sense, an embodied sense of discomfort?
Oh, hell yeah.
And where did that come from?
The fact that he had a lipstick camera pointed at me from an art object, that he laid a table that was preposterously long and thin with a tablecloth made of an American flag to make it look like a coffin so that I would spill my coffee on the flag of my own country. I mean, the fact that he looked like a mutant Ralph Lauren with this kind of lubricious quality, and he's talking all of the science and market stuff and nothing adds up, and there's an heiress bouncing on his knee to get her boobs to jiggle to see whether it can distract. I mean, it's like one of these crazy scenes where nothing about it was normal. There was no trace of a normal world.
So he speaks of going around in a room where the elements of the room are like the objective room, where the elements, I haven't seen anyone else make this connection at all, where the room, like the table is in and of itself, in its design, is going to push you, and your response is going to tell me whether or not you understand what I'm getting at, right? And because one of the ways that he feels about the lipstick camera, if you listen to Weinstein talk on other things, is he feels that it was intentionally there for you to notice. It had to be there for you to notice these things.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of its intention, is that you see these things and it's going to get that kind of reaction from you, that's the intention from the word go. Any response to that before I show you a couple other little clips?
No, I hadn't seen this one, because this is the newer one, right? The newer interview that he had. I had seen him mention Epstein before, but not with as much detail or whatever about the scenarios. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So here's another little bit of it.
I know that this is just a one-time thing here that you got to see, but the construction of the coffin-looking American flag, the spilling of the coffee, this weird power play thing that's going on, that seems, now that you say that, it wasn't him even pulling his own strings, perhaps. It makes a lot more sense, but even that degree of sophistication, I learned this from Daniel Schmachtenberger. We sat down and he spent some time with particularly powerful people.
Yeah.
And he told me this really harrowing story of somebody who has both the desire and the means to treat themselves like an apex predator against their own kind. And they said so. They broke the fourth wall about this and said, apex predators don't care about the prey, but they saw their own kind as prey. And I asked Daniel, how does it feel to sit opposite somebody who isn't rate limited by the resources, who can not only dream to have this, plus have the motivation or lack of virtue or integrity to go ahead and consider doing it, and then has the capacity, the assets to be able to enact it?
Sure.
So he relates it to these ideas that these people become utilitarian, where they feel that they're now objective, that they can evaluate human beings, but to some extent they evaluate them the same way an apex predator looks at prey. That's all related. Now, in C.S. Lewis's other work, he talks about how the demons look at us as food, That's what they want to consume us, as an element within it. Okay, I got one more little bit of it that I want to show you, and then we'll get into a last thing. That jumped forward. We're 10:36. Okay, here we go.
This was intended to be terrifying. It wasn't an accident. It was intended to be as fascinating as it could possibly be, which it was, and terrifying at the same time. And it achieved both. It achieved both objectives. I mean, I was given an opportunity to meet him again. I didn't know what to do. I mean, the other thing that I just found really weird is that he knew about my research, and it turned out that he was connected to my graduate department at Harvard.
So he was connected to my graduate department at Harvard. So university professor, university degrees, connected directly to these weird secret society things as related in That Hideous Strength. It's all like,
he had a connection to the Harvard math department, unbeknownst to me. I don't know when that began. I know two of the professors he was connected through. But this is some unholy story. It has nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. It has to do with whatever this thing was. We tripped over a thing. We tripped over a structure. We named the structure Jeffrey Epstein.
It must be.
So there's, yeah. Do you have any response to that?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, in That Hideous Strength, you know, there are like characters, but the character of the evil or whatever, it is like the organization. You know, like, and different people have like,
right.
You know, their different roles or whatever. Because, you know, obviously, I think the thing that basically everyone more or less agrees on is that Epstein's whole reason, he wasn't any kind of mastermind, but he was used as like this way to create, for the purpose of making blackmail material, you know, like, and you know, you even have that in That Hideous Strength because what's his name? I forget the guy's name. The one guy who they go to the big meeting and they're
the head of the organization is actually nothing. He's just a figurehead. Everyone thinks he's an idiot.
Well, yeah, but I'm not talking about that. You know, like when they go to the party, it's like the first time when.
Oh yeah.
And then there's the one guy who's like, "This is rubbish. I don't want anything to do with it," and then he drives off and like there's like a car wreck or whatever.
There's an accident.
Yeah. And then basically, and Marx loses his personal items, and then they're like, "We found this at the crime scene," and they're like they're basically saying like, "We have this leverage over you. We can say that
right.
killed what's his name," and like, you know, that's their like modus operandi is to if you're not willing to take the pleasures offered, then they will use blackmail to coerce you. Like, or it's like either or. You know, they need you to commit some sin so that you're either invested or your tongue is you know, your lips are sealed for your own protection. Yeah.
Well, and then there's an element,
the way that like sin in general actually really, you know, works.
Right. And then I want to talk about a little bit about the art that you were making reference to before, where they see art itself as playing a role in his reaction, in how he responds. So let me just hit play there.
Frost was not trying to make him insane, at least not in the sense Mark had hitherto given to the word insanity. Frost had meant what he said. To sit in the room was the first step towards what Frost called objectivity, the process whereby all specifically human reactions were killed in a man so that he might become fit for the fastidious society of the macrobes. Higher degrees in the aestheticism of anti-nature would doubtless follow: the eating of abominable food, the dabbling in dirt and blood, the ritual performances of calculus.
The eating of abominable food, the dabbling of dirt and blood.
Obscenities. These were, in a sense, playing quite fair with him, offering him the very same initiation through which they themselves had passed, and which had divided them from humanity, distending and dissipating wither into a shapeless ruin, while it condensed and sharpened Frost into the hard, bright little needle that he now was.
Okay, so being shaped into tools, and that these little pieces of art are some of the things that are being used in order to do that. So one of the things that I don't know to what extent you had heard about it, this was a famous painting that Jeffrey Epstein owns, and it sounds like the kind of paintings that are described in the Objective Room.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the same artist, just so you know, this is a conspiracy theory. He did not own this painting. It is from the same artist. Yes, the same artist did make a depiction of George W. Bush playing with an airplane in front of two destroyed Jenga towers. Yes, the same artist had that, but no, Jeffrey Epstein didn't own that. That is a myth, okay? Don't be ridiculous, okay, Michael? He owned this depiction of his friend, I don't know, Bill Clinton. The dabbling of blood and all this other stuff where it starts taking a ritualistic aspect. A lot of people noted this. Jeffrey Epstein did, in fact, have this little temple business on there. And if you follow Art and Embassies, there's also connections with this woman named Maria Abramovic. I don't know if you know anything about her. I hope you don't, because it's not enjoyable to learn about her, where it is exactly this kind of stuff, where subversive art is used in order to in order to what is sometimes called demoralize or emotionally prepare people, the slow march through the institutions. There's this kind of language that we've all heard. If you're interested at all in these topics, and they all seem kind of present within this novel.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, these elements that people say are bananas, I'm just like, wait. But we know this part happened to some extent. We know this part happened to some extent. And oddly, and like MK Ultra and all this other stuff, to what extent is it not true that people are broken in order to become sharper instruments for elements that we would call demonic?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think so some I can't remember exactly where I found it, but it was like an official published thing or whatever. Like, this is real research or whatever. But obviously, like, one of the main areas that we've experienced this like warping effect is in regard to like sexuality, and
Right.
And the big guy, to look at with that change is Kinsey,
Right.
Alfred Kinsey, and I mean, it's like, so first of all, that's kind of a thing, is like, for whatever reason, whenever people like get objective, they always want to. There's always like these certain areas, like they want to mock religion and they want to warp sexuality. It's like always the same stuff for some reason when you start being objective. But so his embrace of like the Darwinian theory is, I think he started with like studying wasps or whatever and noticing like, oh, wasps have these odd sexual behaviors, and since humans are basically just smart wasps with several steps in between, perhaps that's part, like, human sexuality is permeable in this way. And and so he did some horrible research where a lot of it was, if he found out somebody was like a pedophile or something, that was like fascinating to him, so he would just correspond with them and ask them questions rather than like,
in one of the situations, he sent someone a stopwatch to find, like, to most scientifically understand how long certain things occurred. Absolutely horrifying. Even if you now, maybe all you watched was the what's it called, Liam Neeson movie, where they actually even show that Kinsey would brutalize himself to see if he could enjoy it.
Well, so the interesting thing was that once it became like official and there was like a sexology department at whichever university it was, what their thing was is that they would take the students, undergrad, college students who are going into this field of research, and they would basically show them these edited like films of pornography of just all sorts of bizarre stuff, like with just like one image after another, and like times of, like they didn't have a sense of time. There was no context, and it was just basically to flood their brains with all these crazy, shocking images that, for most people, if they ever experienced anything like that, it would be like one traumatic memory that happened in a very specific concept, but they remove the context and they just flood them with the shocking thing of it to more or less like remove the structures of morality that have been socially constructed. And like that is like that is their way of getting to an objective base, is just to flood people's brains with everything, Right.
Well, and it is interesting too, because if you do, some of this stuff is difficult because people are making connections that aren't necessarily there. But there's other things where the way I said it to my one friend is you do have to dig for some of this information. But Cassandra saying they made us watch that Liam Neeson movie in college. That's a perfect example. I can't remember what I was just about to say. If you did, this is what it was. You know how they would sometimes give people like a paintbrush to like brush off the last bits of dirt on like a really, really valuable fossil? When I say you have to do some digging to learn about some of this stuff, I don't mean with a shovel. I mean with that little tiny paintbrush where there's barely any information covering any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And that's part of what is so suspicious, is the lack of curiosity that you were indicating previously. So like there's an episode of The Crown. I was watching The Crown. My wife and I watched the whole series. And there's an episode of The Crown just about the Queen having a second cousin, 2 second cousins with intellectual disabilities. Whole episode on that, right? They did not spend any time discussing how 2 of her sons, 2 of them, had direct connection and close friendships with complete deviants. There's Jeffrey Epstein is not mentioned. That's well known.
Yeah.
And what's his name? Savile.
Yeah.
Savile is not mentioned at all either. Like Charles is a major figure in that show. They spend zero amount of time making that connection. You don't think any of that's interesting? I get a whole episode on this random stuff. No one's connecting it to anything else. Which, by the way, if you watch that show, Princess Anne constantly goes to an island, and that island is like right next door to Epstein's island. Which
I stopped. I watched most of it, but then like right around like when Princess Di became like introduced, like
it has some really, really terrible elements. Without a doubt.
I didn't finish beyond that, but I mean,
I'm not endorsing the show. What I'm just saying is I'm fascinated by the lack of curiosity about something that is so naturally curious, scandalous, demanding of dramatic representation, right? There's no curiosity related to that. Like we have to drop people because, they had incorrect political views from the past. And yet someone like Kinsey is not, like, the majority of our time is not spent just describing how this person was a psychopath. We're still using the language of John Money. Yeah. Like it's on his Wikipedia page. It's not even, again, it's not dig deep with like a giant industrial machine in order to get at this information. It's little bit of any amount of curiosity will reveal some of this stuff. But the problem is that all this stuff is also connected to complete crazies. So this stuff that Lewis seems to be talking about seems to be information that people are not, they're not like, I don't see anyone else talking about these elements that he's getting at. That, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so here, I think so. My like prior to, I would say, like finding like this little corner and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like during the times, like right when the COVID stuff started happening or whatever, like I went really hard down the kind of conspiracy things, and I became really suspicious of the church's response, I would say, because
Right.
it's so like, and so this is even an interesting thing where like, I was starting to see, and other people notice this too, but like, the Gospel Coalition website, is like had been for a long time, like, this is a good resource, like they're reasonable, they're, it was like founded by Tim Keller. I respect him a lot and all that stuff. And then I noticed like there's these articles that are starting to pop up about like why Christians should not listen to this and that, why they should not feel, and like a lot of like, there was the ones where it's like, why Christians shouldn't feel morally obligated to vote for this party or that, and then there's things about like why Christians should embrace the vaccines and why they should denounce people that are skeptical of blah blah blah. And I'm like looking at it and I'm like, this is like social engineering, these websites. And it was some of the ones where I'm like, who is this? Like there was one particular guy, one particular pastor who was like on that website, who's like in charge of that kind of news and politics type stuff or whatever. And I'm like, where's this guy from? And I'm like, oh, he works at a big mega church right outside of Washington, D.C. I wonder if any government people are involved in that church. Like, and so like there's this stuff like that. But my big frustration is that, you'd have stuff like that and like pastors would just be like, I trust this website, so I'll just go with that. And then people in the church would come up and they would have these things. And some of them might be off base, like there's definitely a lot of like, there's definitely a range of like conspiracy stuff. The problem with it is that that's not necessarily a reliable source. And I think part of that's by design, because they'll tell you awful things and then they'll add additional lies to the awful things that are more easily disproven. And so then you disprove the part that's easily disproven, and then the whole thing gets thrown out. And I saw pastors responding like, don't believe this stuff, it's all crazy stuff. And so that was like, I was like, I don't know who to trust, I don't know what to do. So I started digging into the Bible and really studying just the nature of the demonic. And this is like before I found Heiser. So it's like because I was like, I don't know who I can trust. I can't trust anybody. I'm just going to search the Bible for myself, just with the concordance and try to find the pertinent things. And then I kind of like worked out a framework, which ultimately was like, yes, these powers are real. Good news, God is bigger and more in control. And then like I found Heiser's stuff and I was like, oh yes, this like validates all of my own research. So that was helpful. But the other things that really helped me like get out of that funk was That Hideous Strength and Screwtape Letters.
Michael, not again.
Wait, good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You're back.
Yeah, so C.S. Lewis and then Francis Schaeffer. And Francis Schaeffer dealt with like a lot of the actual, he was dealing with all this art stuff. Like, he was dealing with like why are
culture and
why are we having like these terrible types of modern art? Like what is the worldview that's driving that? And he actually said I found one interview online where he said, every Christian ought to read That Hideous Strength every 5 years. Every 5 years you should read it. I think we need to up it to like once a year now. Yeah. But
well, that's part of what's so interesting is that this is such an old book.
Yeah.
And
he said that in the 70s. He said that in the 70s. If people had paid attention then.
Yeah. And again, the Enochian literature, the interest in all this stuff that we now call the Deuteronomy 30 32 worldview and all this other stuff. That this has been around for all that time. I think directly related to what you were saying, right after this bit on the newspaper, we get this. I don't believe you can do that, said Mark. Not with the papers that are read by educated people. That shows you're still in the nursery, lovely, said Miss Hardcastle. Haven't you yet realized that it's the other way around? How do you mean? Why, you fool, it's the educated reader who can be gulled, and our difficulty comes with the other. When did you meet a workman who believes the papers? He takes it for granted that they're all propaganda and skips the articles. He buys the paper for the football results and the little paragraphs about girls falling out of windows and corpses found in Mayfair flats. He is our problem. We have to recondition him. But the educated public, the people who read the highbrow weeklies, don't need reconditioning. They're all right already. They'll believe anything.
Yeah.
As one of the class you mentioned, said Mark with a smile, I just don't believe it. Good Lord, said the fairy. Where are your eyes? Look at what the weeklies have got away with. Look at the weekly question. There's a paper for you. When basic English came in simply as the invention of free-thinking Cambridge dawns, nothing was too good for it. Nothing was too good for it. As soon as it was taken up by the Tory Prime Minister, it became the menace to the purity of our language. And wasn't the monarchy an expensive absurdity for 10 years? And then when the Duke of Windsor abdicated, didn't the question go all monarchist and legitimist for about a fortnight? Did they drop a single reader? Don't you see that the educated reader can't stop reading the highbrow weeklies, whatever they do? He can't. He's been conditioned.
Yeah. It's interesting, because that's the other part of my story and kind of this whole thing is that at some point I realized, because I'm a carpenter, that's what I do. And I kind of realized, like, my job doesn't work if I become all objective or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like straight is straight and level is level and you need those concrete realities keep you grounded, which is which is why the fact that we live so much online is bad for us. Not like we need to be here. Like, it's great that we're having this conversation.
Yeah. But we need to exist in the real world. Yeah. We need to exist in the real world. And part of, I think, as artists, like people who are interested in art, I also think that we should be trying to get up at objective. Like, the thing is I believe the objective is the thing that draws our hearts in. It's not contrary to our hearts, which is what the objective room is trying to do, to be, as you said, subversive. Instead, I think art can get at something good, true, beautiful, and hold us to higher standards. That it can bring it, and it can do all those things. And that one of the things that you can see present in all this other stuff is that the kind of art produced is actually art that makes us hate art.
Yeah.
That's one of the most interesting aspects of it, is that it is, as you said, subversive, but it's so subversive, it subverts the notion of art in particular. And so now people hate art. Yeah. Poetry is so subversive that people hate poetry, because this is something where it's beyond argument. It pulls us in like such a dramatic way.
Yeah, there's a really great, and this kind of came from me studying Schaeffer, because he did a really good job bringing this stuff up. But then Rookmacher, Hans Rookmacher, I don't know if you've read anything.
I've never even heard of that guy.
Okay, so Burn Power, the Anadromist, his channel, you've been there. He's got some lectures from Rookmacher, but he was an art history professor, whatever, basically, over there in Holland, and he kind of pointed this thing of like around the time of the Renaissance, there's this disconnect where like the more humble aspects of like craftsmanship, building a house and making the chairs and the tables and these things got separated from like the more ornamental fine art, sculpture and painting, mostly, and then also like literature and poetry and those kind of things. And basically then everything, that's what became art, was just those like really sophisticated things. And then everything is supposed to be like, what's the source of art? It has to be like based subject. It's all based on like the genius of the artist, like, and so like you have to have it, and basically like that's a lot of pressure, and you have the guys of the Renaissance who have all this like cultural stuff to build on, so they can do a great job. But then you get to the, people are just like asking what's next, and then you get like people, pissing on in a can and putting a crucifix in it or whatever, and that's supposed
Well,
to be...
and that's the thing too, is that at the end of that hideous strength, part of what he has to do in that objective room is to stomp on, to deface a crucifix.
Yeah,
he's being asked to do this, and he's like, what? Why? Like, if this has no value, then why do I have to do this thing?
But yeah. And so
Chad, can we bring Chad in? Chad, did you have
I'm listening.
have thoughts you wanted to? Did you want to add anything?
Oh, not exactly. I'm just listening for right now, but I will. I'm sure I will. I can never stay too quiet for too long.
Well, just like so what I always think about is, the guys that build the tabernacle, Bezalel and Oholiab, and they were in charge of the whole thing. So not only did they do the fancy ornamentations and the gold work and crafting the Ark of the Covenant and all this stuff, they also had to make sure the thing stood up in the wind in the desert, and so like they were grounded and rooted in like the whole process.
But it's not just that. Those individuals is where the term Holy Spirit is first used in the Torah.
Yeah.
The first reference to Holy Spirit is this literally inspiring, right? Inspire is it, like to inhale, inspire, expire. That they are inspired by the Holy Spirit to do these things. So it is not mere, the craftsmanship itself is a kind of possession. It is they are to some extent seeing something bigger.
Yeah.
Able to do that in relationship to the higher principle that they're connected to.
Yeah, and I mean, I see it as in that, like, those people, like, because, like, God's thing, like, we make stuff, God makes people. So those are the people that, like, God made those people for that purpose. And obviously, they had a whole experience of training while they're in Egypt and all this stuff, but, like, he gave them their set of eyes where, and it's really similar to, like, Solomon in his temple, where it talks about, Solomon, because the temple has all this gold stuff and whatever, but then it talks about, like, Solomon studying the weeds that grow in the cracks of the stones and, like, the lizards and all the little things, and and the like when Jesus says consider the lilies, and he points it to Solomon, and those are like the top of the two pillars at the front of the temple are lilies. Like, the thing that really always is trying to be subverted is what God has created, and, like, it's which is why you get, like, brutalism and all this stuff, like, it's which is kind of why I feel a little bit weird when people are, like, fixated on, like, cathedrals or whatever. Like, cathedrals are beautiful in a period of time, but that was not, like, the ultimate thing. Like, because the more and this is, like, even where you say, like, the true good good thing that science does is when we don't look at it as like a reductionist thing that lets us cut things apart and do whatever we want with them. When we study nature the way that God has created it, it just becomes more and more and more awe-inspiring. And that's
so, and that actually is an element of that hideous strength. Lewis was against vivisection, of experimenting on animals, of playing with them, of playing with life, of a whole bunch of things. And I've wondered to what extent, like, COVID is a perfect example of why that hideous strength needed to be understood, because what you're valuing, what you think is objective, clearly has with it inspiration. It is taking with it from other people, from other ideas, and making things happen a particular way. Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's like what ultimately gave me peace, was like ultimately seeing like these kind of things that come up. You know, you have like an institution like the one, like the NICE or whatever. They're gonna do all this stuff, and it's gonna fail eventually. And it's not to downplay the horrendous part of what comes out of it, but there is like somehow I don't know. It's like God allows our rebelliousness in a way, because the more we question Him, or I guess you could say it, like there's two. Well, this is what if you watch that video where the illustration at the end where I talk about the cross, it's like if you try to subvert the cross, the subversion of it still points to like the reality of the real thing. So like the best thing would be to earnestly seek God and seek His knowledge, and that'll take you into all sorts of good ways, and I think innovative ways of helping people. And I don't think we have to be afraid of like science as a means of, if it's rooted in God and His creation, that is a means that like we can bless people. But
right.
If people try to do that out of rebellion, they're going to end up accomplishing the same thing by trying to disprove God. Every argument new argument to try to disprove God or disprove His goodness, when it backfires, is going to end up moving the whole thing forward ultimately.
Well, and that's actually part of that hideous strength again, is that, and I think it's one of the reasons why people don't particularly like it, is the end of the, like, it becomes very, very evident that God is completely sovereign, that He is not surprised by the plans of the enemy. There's a bit of a Deus Ex Machina that happens in the end. There's literally a flood. There's literally like the Tower of Babel. People become confused, unable to communicate with each other, in a pretty funny scene. And even the animals themselves become part of it. Like the elements of nature, right, become all part of it. And so regardless of human intention and human desire, and it's kind of presented like a miniature apocalypse, where there's this idea that like it seems like the world was just about to end almost, and that God stopped it from happening, and you just never even hear about it. Like it's presented within the reality of the book that this could have actually happened and you never would have heard about it. And this is all the reasons why, and this is how God has essentially, I think C.S. Lewis is just telling you straight up that God is doing this over and over again, and we just have no clue to what extent He fully is in control. Not in some Calvinist way, but in like in this way that He's keeping in mind everything.
I don't mind saying in the Calvinist way. I mean, that's why I like more or less fall in that camp. But in the way that Luke Thompson's not so offended by it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think about like, just the way when people are like looking at this stuff and being like, if you're always looking at the past and you're looking at it as a series of like bad mistakes, and even I think, my thing is even to say like, to go back to the fall, if you're thinking the problem was like, if you're so fixated on like, why didn't they make the right choice instead of the wrong choice? Like, God imagined that world, and it wasn't very interesting, honestly. You know, like the more interesting thing is like how much can stuff go bad and God still fixes it, and we don't like that because oftentimes we're the ones that suffer because of that. But then, you know, like I think of like with like modern medicine and things like that. You know, it's like my wife when she went into labor, like her water broke, and then she labored for a long time, but she never dilated like at all, and so the baby was not going to come out in a natural way, and they had to do an emergency C-section, and that was how all three of our daughters were born through C-section. And like, and I've heard people talking about like, oh, it's, you know, like it's not like the best for like a baby's health and stuff like that, and it's like, okay, maybe that's so, but my children would probably have died, and my wife probably would have died trying to give birth if it wasn't for that like technology or, you know, that technique and stuff like that. And so it's like, it just makes me, when I see bad stuff, it's like I'm like, I wouldn't go down that path. That seems like it's the wrong thing to do. Some of these things frighten me, but I trust that God's in control, and ultimately he's going to be glorified through the resolution that he brings to all these kind of things.
Yeah, this feels like it's a kind of a natural place, I think, to end on this topic, because we just got to the end of the book, and will be a good place for us to end. There's my crazy ideas. You seem to play with them pretty well. Chad, do you have anything you want to add or anything? No? Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. Oh.
Calling it a day, eh?
Yeah. I can't do it while I'm working, so I did this on my lunch break, and I'm now have to get back to work.
Yeah, as do I. I do have real work to do. So.
Okay. All right.
All right, fellas.
If you guys are around, I'm doing the judges' Bible study tomorrow, so you guys can join me then.
Awesome. All right.
Toodles.
See you later.
Bye. Thanks everyone for tuning in.